Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be a video on War Magic. We are in the Ultimate Magic book today. We're going to look at arcane spells. We'll look through the 1st to 6th level arcane spells and see how they would be used in a warfare scenario. Think medieval armies clashing, think invading castles and stuff, think ship-to-ship combat. We'll look at these spells. A lot of these spells are very useful for your players, but are they useful in a mass combat? Or could they be useful in a mass combat if you could give them access to your whole army? So this episode is the arcane spells. Anticipate peril. Target gains a bonus on 1 initiative check. That could be useful, especially if you could give it to all your soldiers or at least all your lieutenants, so on and so forth. Bungle. Target takes a -20 on its next attack roll or check. So there's your opposite of True Strike. If you could put that on a touch item or a weapon that just has to touch the target, so say a bunch of sling bullets, and pass it out amongst your army, whether they hand throw them or use a sling to throw them. When they impact the enemy's armor, and that's just the touch, you just have to be higher than their dex. If they're in formation, their dex isn't going to be high anyways. And when it hits them, they get a -20 to their next attack roll. Corrosive Touch. Touch attack deals 1d4 acid per level. That could be useful, but in most situations for a military aspect, not so much. But I love that addition. That now adds acid to a good selection for 1st level spells as a wizard. Decomposed Corpse turns corpse into a clean skeleton. It's useful if you're animating undead, or if you wanted to transport a body and it be real light. Delusional Pride. Target is penalized on attacks and checks, but gains bonus against charms and compulsions. That's just funny in its description. I don't see that being very useful unless you were trying to use it against the leaders of the military. Ear-piercing Scream. Deals sonic damage and daze targets. Daze target. So a single target. So if that could affect more than one person, that would be useful. Otherwise, not so much. So as it is, not that useful. Forced Quiet. Target cannot make loud noises. If you could get your strike force, your PCs in there, to attack the bosses, the leaders, the lieutenants, the generals, and so on, and hit them with Forced Quiet, if it would last long enough, or if it activates remotely by your spellcasters, if you just set up the item so you can do it that way, then that could prevent them from giving out loud commands because they're forced not to make loud noises. That would be very weird in the middle of a combat if the general all of a sudden can't command the way he normally does. Icicle Dagger. Masterwork Ice Dagger deals +1 cold damage. If you need a weapon out of nowhere, that's a good one. Interrogation. Target answers questions or suffers pain. Well, that would be good for your strike force trying to get information. Key Arrow. Arrow deals damage as your unarmed strike. Well, with most arcane spellcasters, that's not going to be a lot of damage. Polypurpose Panache. Gain a relaxing or entertaining effect. Probably mispronounced that very well. Ray of Sickening. Ray makes the subject sickened. If you could apply that to a lot of targets all at once, that could be very useful, because it would be very demoralizing for that army to fight while all of them feel sick. So put those as one-use items on weapons. So all your slingers have this, or all your archers on one arrow. Say it's the green feathered arrow. They pull that and they fire it. If it hits the target, and make it a touch effect again. If it hits the target, they are sickened. They get a save, of course, but they are sickened, and the majority of the army is not going to guarantee to make that save. So, especially the low-level front ranks of most militaries. Restore corpse. Skeletal corpse grows flesh. So you transport that corpse, like I said, then you cast this. Now it has its flesh back. Now, if you're trying to animate something with flesh, now it has it. If you're trying to give it a decent burial, now you can, where they can actually see it. Or you can go one step further and now raise the dead. Shadow Weapon creates a quasi-real masterwork weapon. That's up there with Ice Dagger. It'd be useful for your individuals to have when they're out of weapons. Imagine carrying a little trinket, that ice trinket or shadow trinket, that you one command word use, and you now have a weapon for, even if it lasted an hour, and then it's just gone. That could be useful, especially in a tight situation. So if you put that on your strike force, hide it on their persons where it's something the size of a coin, and they're not searched thoroughly enough, well, now they still have weapons. Snapdragon Firework creates 1 dragon firework per level. That can be useful, especially the way the fireworks work. Summon Minor Monster summons 1d3 tiny animals. You'd have to get real creative with the tiny animals with your game master's permission. And you can get very, very mean to the enemy. I summon 1d3 arrow frogs. Yeah. Unprepared Combatant. Target takes a -4 on initiative and reflex saves. That would be good. If you wanted to pepper your enemy army with that. Again, it'd have to be turned into like one-use touch items. Vocal Alteration disguises target's voice. Defensively, you could use that on your enemies so that they don't sound the same, so that would be very intriguing. If you set it up right, you could have their own soldiers kill their own commanders. But that would be difficult to do, but very impressive. Youthful Appearance. Target appears younger. Okay. Level 2 Arcane Spells. Badger's Ferocity. Weapons are keen while you concentrate. If you could just give them a temporary item that functions like a scabbard to keen, except more temporary, that would work better for your army. So if you gave it to your strike force, that's great. That's your PCs normally. But if you give it to your regular soldiers, they all draw their swords and they're all keen for, I don't know, 10 minutes. And then the scabbard is no longer magical. That could make a difference on how much damage they're dealing to the enemy. Blood Transcription. Wizard only. Learn a spell from the target's blood. I don't see that being useful unless you're fighting some weird things that can teach you some magic by examining their blood. Boiling Blood. Target takes fire damage and orcs get +2 strength. Boiling Blood just doesn't affect enough, but if you had more sources of it, you could really hurt the enemy. And then if you're army consists of orcs, you could cast it on your own orcs. They take a little bit of damage, but their strength goes up. So, compassionate ally. Target is compelled to help injured ally. Injure a good portion of the military and then somehow get that cast upon those that are still fighting. That could really change how the battle's going. Cushioning bands. Force bands protect against crushing. I don't see that being useful unless your subjects are going to, the ones you want to put this on are going to be subjected to lots of crushing damage. And most, okay, so those trying to storm a castle where rocks are falling on them, not only do you normally have to deal with boiling oil and burning oil, but they usually chuck rocks and stuff on you. This could work on that, reducing the damage. Defensive shock, electric damage damages your attackers. Get that on your shields of your soldiers in the front lines as a one-use item. So say for the first 2 minutes of combat, so 20 rounds, they have that. And it's a command word activated. They all know the command word. So they do that. The enemy hits them and takes electrical damage. They hit them again, they take electrical damage. They don't have to hit the shield. It's just the shield's what carries the spell. Delay pain, ignores pain for 1 hour per level. That could be useful on your injured soldiers. Give them potions that can do that. But I'm not sure how useful it'd be. That one's more of a, you'd have to use it a couple times and play with it. Disfiguring touch, target becomes disfigured. That'd be great against a vain target, but it wouldn't necessarily be good against the enemy soldiers unless you were using it before the battle began. And at that point, I'd just put it on some one-use items, arrowheads, whatever. Disguise other, as disguise self, but affects you or another. That can be useful for your strike force. Frigid touch. Target takes cold damage and is staggered. The stagger effect could be useful because it prevents them from getting a full attack or attacking for 1 turn. Ghostly disguised, you look like a ghost of yourself. That could be great, especially with the spell listed after it. This could really mess with the morale of enemy soldiers, especially if you do this at night. Haunting mist. Creatures are shaken and take wisdom damage, and then you arrive with your ghostly disguise as you're trying to sneak around with your strike force and figure out what's going on and what you can gather that would give you all an advantage. Add this in there as well. Mad hallucination. Target takes penalties to mental actions. Now you got a lot of things going your way, and this is only 2nd level spells. Masterwork transformation makes normal item into a masterwork one, which also works on your armor and your weapons. So you just pay the gold piece cost, and then this is cast on it. Miserable pity. Opponents cannot attack a pathetic creature. Not going with that very well. It doesn't appeal to me. I don't feel that working in a military situation. Oppressive boredom. Target loses its next action. That could be useful. If you could get all your enemies to lose their action for 1 turn, that would work, but that would be harder to pull off because you're using an action to get them to lose an action. So unless they could lose more than 1 action, then it'd be very beneficial. Pernicious poisoning. Target takes a -4 penalty against poison. If you needed to affect somebody and that they would be susceptible to that spell, that would be useful. Protective penumbra. Shadow protects the target from light. That could be useful if you have an army of undead that is affected by light, like vampires. Sculpt simulacrum. Alter a simulacrum's appearance. I don't see that being useful in a military situation. Share memory. Shares one memory with the target. That could be useful if you have a very good memory on what you were seeing at the enemy's location. Silk to steel. Use a scarf as a shield or whip. That'd be useful for an improvised weapon and for your strike force. Skin scent. Animate and possess your own skin as if it were a separate creature. Creepy, and that would be a weird thing to do, and that I could see that affecting the enemy's morale a lot. Steel voice. Target gains the croaking spell blight. That could be useful if the target needs to speak a lot. Symbol of mirroring. Triggered rune creates a mirror images. That could make your army seem a lot bigger than it is, so that could, in turn, not guaranteed, but in turn, it could affect the morale of the enemy. So you get a few of those going on, all of a sudden your military is a lot bigger than it needs to be, or than their report said it was going to be. Unnatural lust. Target is compelled to kiss or caress another creature. That's starting to sound like blue mage magic, which is always fun. I don't see that being useful in a military situation, but that can be very useful pulling pranks on your own party members. Unshakable chill. Target is afflicted with severe cold. Web shelter. Creates a comfortable shelter made of webbing. That still has its own downside because fire would pretty much destroy that shelter real quick. Now we're on to third level spells. Animate Dead Lesser creates one skeleton or zombie. If you're making an undead army, that would be great. Especially if you had like a dozen spellcasters. They don't even have to be high level. Dozen spellcasters with wands that do this. And they know the command word and everything. They could go through and every turn animate a dozen of these after the battle's over. So your enemy soldiers are now rising as skeletons and zombies that are reinforcing your military. Anthropomorphic animal. Animal becomes bipedal. Well, that'll be creepy. Ash storm hampers vision and movement. That's great because if that's a big enough area, then that could really deal with your enemy's military moving around. So let's look that one up. Ash storm. Range 400 feet plus 40 feet per level. Okay, so already it's a great distance from the caster. So that's a plus. It has the same range as a fireball. Radius is a 40-foot radius cylinder that's 20 foot high. So it's an 80-foot area. It's the same as an entangle. Mostly because it does no damage. So this all makes a lot of sense. It'll last 1 round per caster level, minimum 5 rounds at the time you can cast this. Driving ash blocks all sight, even dark vision, within the spell's area of effect. The falling cinders cause the ground in the area to become difficult terrain. So even those moving through it will have a hard time moving through it. That is a very useful spell. That would allow you to control what your enemy's military is doing. If you can get a couple of one-use items or a couple spellcasters to pull out scrolls of this to use it, you could pretty much take an 80-foot, 160-foot, 240-foot area with 3 castings and make it all difficult terrain, can't see, can't really breathe, it's all covered in ash. That could really affect where your enemies can move to or move from. Burrow. Target gains a burrow speed of 15 feet. Countless eyes. Extra eyes give all-around vision. That'd be great for your scouts. Maybe even your archers. Distracting cacophony. Noise makes it difficult to cast. That would be great. Throw that on a bunch of one-use stones and get them towards your enemy, or one-use items like arrows and whatnot, and get them towards your enemy spellcasters as fast as you can. Eldritch Fever. Target gains an Eldritch Agu spell blight. Eruptive Pustules. Acid boils burst when you are attacked. That just sounds gross. I can see that being very useful. If your military consists of the orcs and stuff, this would be very useful because I see them using that. All of a sudden they're covered in all these boils before the battle begins, and as they take damage, they're bursting acid upon the enemy that hits them. Excruciating Deformation. Target takes dex and con damage. If you're trying to make an example before the battle begins, that could affect the morale of the enemy. But as the battle's going on, this wouldn't be that useful. Force Punch. Target takes force damage and is pushed away. That could be useful if you're trying to get through a narrow bridge that somebody's defending. Howling Agony. Screaming pain limits the target's actions. That would also be useful against your spellcaster enemies. Key Leech. Add to your key pool when you're critically hit. If you have a key pool, that could be useful. I just don't like being critically hit, so of course you don't have a choice. The enemy rolls a 20, they roll a 20. I don't like being critically hit. Loathsome Veil. Nauseated and or sicken weak creatures. That would be very useful against the enemy's military, because most of the enemy's soldiers, not all, but usually the first couple of ranks of the enemy's soldiers are the newbies, the one hit dice at most. So that could be very useful. Mad Monkey. Summons a swarm of mischievous monkeys. You can just already imagine the chaos that would happen in a military formation. Marionette Possession. Magic jar, but limited to line of sight. That could be useful, but I think magic jar is a single target, so you'd have to pick that carefully. I just don't see it being useful with a lot of soldiers clashing. Now, if there's other things in there, then you possess like the giant, that can be great, especially if that was the enemy's giant. Now it's running havoc amongst the enemy soldiers. Monstrous Physique 1. You take the form and some of the powers of a small or medium monstrous humanoid. That can be useful, especially if you have a lot of knowledge of the monstrous humanoids. Rain of Frogs. Summon a swarm of poisonous frogs. There you go. Poison dart frogs falling from the sky. Reckless Infatuation. Target is compelled to stay near another. Not that great. Sands of Time. Target temporarily ages. Could be real good if they're already really old. Or if you just wanted to scare the hell out of your enemies, you could have a bunch of one-use items affect the enemies in the front couple of rows, and then when they turn around asking for help, all of a sudden they're super old. Even if it is temporary, that's a good mental effect too. Strangling Hair. Your hair animates and grapples. Don't see that being that useful. Toxic Gift. Target suffers the effect of the poison in you. So that requires you to drink a poison or be affected by a poison. I don't see that being that useful. Unadulterated Loathing. Target is compelled to avoid another creature. It's a single target, so it's not going to be useful for your military. unless you could affect a large amount of them. Undead Anatomy 1. You take the form of some of the powers of a small or medium undead. You would have to see what the limits are, because there are some medium undead that are really potent. So that could be very useful. Of course, it might require, the ones I'm thinking might require you to have the second version of that. Vision of Hell. Illusionary hellscape makes creatures shaken. That could be useful, especially when they start fighting and then all of a sudden the landscape changes. 4th level, arcane spells. Age resistance lesser, ignore penalties from middle age. That combined with the time one, that would be useful. But for your whole military, not necessarily. Not unless you're recruiting from the middle age and up for your soldiers. Agonize. Pain encourages an outsider to obey you. I can see that being useful for an individual spellcaster, not necessarily great for a war situation. Control summoned creature. Direct a summoned monster as if you had summoned it. That can be useful, especially if your enemy's summoning monsters into your ranks. You can then take control of it, send it out to fight them, and for the duration that you have control over it, it would be obeying your commands. Now, if your duration ends first, well, it'll be coming back to do its thing. Curse of Magic Negation. Target gains the negate spell blight. That can be useful if you can target spellcasters with it, or rangers or paladins. Greater Dark Vision. See 120 feet in total darkness. That could be useful for your strike force. Mass Daze. That is useful. False Life Greater. Gain 2d10 temporary HP plus 1 per level. Familiar Melding. Possess your familiar. Flesh Swarm Infestation. Worms deal HP and dex damage. I could see that being useful. Malfunction, especially intimidating your enemy soldiers. If you could catch one with your strike force and release them onto the battlefield with that before the battle begins, think of the intimidation. Malfunction. Construct behaves oddly for 1 round per level. Malicious Spite. Target is compelled to plot against another. Monstrous Physique. 2. Take the form and some of the powers of a tiny or large monstrous humanoid. Overwhelming Grief. Grieving target can take no action and is denied its dex bonus. Ride the Waves. Target can breathe water and swim. If you can give that to your strike force or a section of your military, you can get into a better flanking position based on the battlefield. That could be very useful. Shadow Step. Teleport from one shadow to another. That can be useful, especially if you can give that as a bunch of 1 or 2 use items to your military, especially your more powerful soldiers. Simulacrum Lesser. Creates a double of a weak creature. Symbol of Revelation. Triggered symbol reveals illusion. Symbol of Slowing. Triggered rune slows creature. That would give you control over the battlefield. If you could get them into a narrow corridor, narrow bridge or something, and put that on it, and it slows the creatures in the lead, it in turn slow the whole army. Terrible Remorse. Creature is compelled to harm itself. Not that great. Touch of Slime. Touch infest target with green slime. That's mean and gross and cool. So I could see that. If you could get that going against multiple people, that would be very mean. Vermin Shape 1. Ventrolic Mist. As fire shield except acid damage. Cool. Volcanic Storm. Hot rocks deal 5d6 damage. Interesting. 5th level arcane spells. Acid Spray. 1d6 level acid damage plus 1 round of acid. Astral Projection. Lesser corrosive consumption. Acid Patch damages an opponent. I can see that, yep. Curse of Disgust. Target is sickened when viewing a trigger. Echolocation. Sonic Sense gives you blind sight 40 feet. That would be great if you're fighting Drow. Things that can drop magical darkness, that would be your counter to it without having to brighten up the area. So give that to a bunch of your players. Maybe it's a mask they can wear. And whenever the darkness comes, they just pull the mask up. And now all of a sudden they can see with the echolocation what's going on. Fickle Winds. Wind walls selectively block attacks. Could be useful. Icy Prison. Thick ice holds and damages the target. If you were targeting their general or lieutenants, that could be very useful. Or something very powerful in their army, like a giant. But I have to go into more detail to find out about that one. So, Icy Prison. Lasts 1 minute per level. Range medium. 1 creature. I think there's a typo here. It says range medium and then it does 10 feet plus 10 feet per level. So I think it's supposed to be 100 feet plus 10 feet per level. Duration's 1 minute per level. 1 inch thick ice per caster level. If it fails its save, it is helpless but can still breathe. If it makes its save, it gains the entangled condition but can otherwise act normally. Whether or not it saves, it takes 1 point of cold damage per caster level. Each round it is helpless or entangled in the ice. The ice has a hardness of 0 and 3 hit points per inch of thickness. And the inch of thickness is based on your caster level. So by the time you're casting this, it'd be about 11 inches thick. So you're looking at about 33 hit points. If broken, the creature is freed. A creature can break the ice as a full round action with a successful strength check, DC 25 plus your caster level. So you're looking at like a DC 26. Interesting. I could see that being useful if you wanted to target the bigger creatures or the more destructive creatures, like the knight on horseback or whatnot. Lightning Arc. Target in a line take 1d6 electrical damage per level. Monstrous Physique 3. Take the form of some diminutive or huge monstrous humanoids. Now that becomes very useful. Especially if you could give that to a few of your soldiers. All of a sudden they become this big monster and now they're waylaying into the enemy's forces. Plague Carrier. Target attacks carry Filth Fever. Filth Fever is not that great. It's usually the most common one because rats carry it. Possess Object. Possess and animate 1 object. Rapid Repair. Construct gains Fast Healing 5. Now that's neat. If that's the case, you just need your wizards to enter combat with a few shield guardians and cast that on them while they're fighting. That could really decimate a section of the military. Smug Narcissism. Target is distracted by its sense of self. That's hilarious. Sonic Thrust. Sound moves targets away from you. Since it says targets, that could be very useful because it's affecting more than one. All of a sudden, this section of the military goes back. This section of the military goes back. Not only do they take some damage, but they're also pushed away. That said, being a 5th level spell, the damage isn't going to be low, so they're probably going to take a lot of damage for their hit points. Soothe Construct, reduce the berserk chance of a construct. That can be very useful if you're trying to control a construct of your own, or if you know that clay golem is very likely to go berserk while it fights. Symbol of Scrying, triggered rune activates scrying sensor. That'd be great for defending your own locations and your own sensitive information before battles. Unbreakable Construct, increase construct hardness or DR. That is useful. Undead Anatomy 2, take the form of some of the powers of a tiny or large undead. That could be useful. Vermin Shape 2 as vermin shape, but tiny or large. Wall of Sound, sonic wall deflects and damages creatures. That can be useful. The walls are always useful because then you can start funneling the enemy into a location where you can kill them easier and they can't fight as well. 6th level arcane spells. Age resistance, ignore penalties from old age. Battle Mind Link, you and an ally gain attack and AC bonuses. Cold Ice Strike, cone of ice slivers deal 1d6 points of cold damage per level. Where it's a cone, that can be very destructive. If you can give that to a few of your soldiers and they can come at the flanks of the enemy, they can destroy sections of the military quickly. Conjured Black Pudding, summon a black pudding. Imagine that appearing right in the middle of the shield wall ranks. That'd just be very mean and destructive. I would definitely do it. Greater Contagion, inflicts subject with a magical disease. Major Curse, as Bestow Curse, but harder to remove. Envious Urge, targets steal from or disarm others. Now that can be useful if they're trying to disarm their allies while you're fighting. Ice Crystal Teleport, target is frozen and then teleported. That could be useful with your strike team going in. They could freeze a target that they want to get information from and teleport it away. Leashed Shackles, target is restricted to a specific location. Monstrous Physique 4 as Monstrous Physique 3 with more abilities. Interesting. Serenity, peaceful feelings harm those attempting violence. Symbol of Sealing, creature triggered wall of force. Create triggered wall of force. Now that's useful. It's a wall spell again, so. Undead Anatomy 3, take the form and some of the powers of diminutive or huge undead. Utter Contempt, target's attitude worsens by 2 categories. Vengeful Outrage, target is compelled to destroy one enemy. Under the right condition, Utter Contempt and Vengeful Outrage could be useful for your strike force, affecting a conversation that's going on in front of them without them being noticed. Other than that, I don't see those being very useful for a military battle. So those are the spells from 1st level to 6th level arcane used for war magic, like my opinions, which one would be good and how I'd go about using them. So the next episode of this will be the same book, but we'll look at divine spells. Well, until we all meet again, guys.